Be here and in the seat of the leadership of the discipline of sociology and with some of the foremost care scholars. I see Lynette Udall and Cameron McDonald and many, many others of you. So to be here among friends old and new is a great pleasure for me. So I've spent the last while with my tape recorder going around and interviewing service providers and their clients in what is a kind of a circle around American intimate life. And I'd like to frame this as modern American family life in neoliberal times. And I want to start by taking you with me on this excursion. This is a New Yorker cartoon, just to start with, where a man is selling eye contact, $1 a look. So there are many kinds of service. Some are old, traditional, some very new. And care work, for example, was classic for all rich people for 3 centuries, and has become normal mainstream fare for the middle class now that half of the labor force is made up of women. Same with elder care. So we have kind of a traditional care center here. And then added to that are a number of new niches, one of which is pet care. And I actually talked to a man who's time-bound guy who worked these long 60 hours a week, and he traveled a third of the time. His wife was a banker. They had 3 daughters, and he said, well, we hire someone to walk our dog from Monday to Friday. And then his voice rose. But people who hire someone to walk their dog on Saturday, well now, why have a dog? And that became a really interesting little draw-the-line thing. Why have a? When I heard that, then I knew I'd struck a kind of a line, a boundary that everyone symbolically draws, but in such different places, as we'll discover. You can hire someone to put your family photograph album together and in their handwriting write Uncle Fred on the left. I actually interviewed a personal assistant who tried to imitate the handwriting of her employer. Really interesting, for me, territory of the simulacrum here. Wedding planners are really post-80s. I guess the original, it was in the late 60s that some of the first associations of wedding planners began. Fairly new. We're going to hear about it, a birthday party planner that you can hire. And often there's a presenter at the birthday party. In other words, there's a planner and an itinerary, and then they outsource the idea of a magician or a clown. And very often the letters of thanks go to the planner. Dear Sophie, thank you very much for a very special and really fun birthday party. I had the best time playing games, digging for eggs, having cake. Thanks again for helping make my birthday so special. Love, Harrison, age 7. So we'll hear about a father who's going to kind of resist the new kind of custom in his neighborhood of hiring planners. All right, then there are match making groups, and we'll hear from that. You can hire a name therapist called a namologist who helps you discover the right name. You know, if it's Matthew, he might have a learning disability. If it's Billy, he's going to have anger management problems. Susie, you know, so they sort of have these personalities and claim it as a science. So it almost spooks you into hiring the person. Okay, so some of this is hokey. As I thought I had come to the end of the world in San Jose, California, when I was interviewing a life coach who had specialized in wantology. But you know what? She turned out to be really smart and interesting, as all these people did. I've been on a journey here, and the first thing is I went in thinking, oh no, this is way too much. Where's the limit here? This is neoliberalism gone haywire, and we're outsourcing our families and kind of processing them and buying them back, you know, and none of it structurally addresses the issue of work hours, work security, mail sharing at home. It looked like a kind of a buy out of the whole feminist project and humanistic project of trying to help people have caring relations at home. So that's where I began. And it's interesting that a lot of these specialists are actually very smart, and a lot of their clients are too. And so my first thing I learned was to be a little more humble and less judging here. Wait a minute, where are we? So, you know, there's a kind of a emotional subtext to all research, I think, and my first act of emotion work was to back up and say, wait a minute, I've got something to learn here. No easy judgments. However, what is it that we are looking at? I began to notice that these services had a variety of different kinds of cultural presentation. For example, you could look at childcare, and here Lynette could help us, but there are like 40,000 national workers at quite low wages that work at KinderCare. But here's the language in which it's described. At KinderCare learning centers, we understand that you expect the best for your child. That's why we take great pride in providing a secure, warm, attentive home away from home. Okay. And then it goes into how to find a KinderCare on your route to work, and that they know first aid and the practicalities. Okay, that's the language. Home away from home. Then there's another one, a service in the San Francisco Bay Area called Virtual Daughters. And at Virtual Daughters, we believe that staying active and engaged and essential throughout every stage of life. So this is an elder care service. And it's kind of upscale. It promises you an educated person. And but they talk about our daughters. So that is, the services daughters are, you purchase their time. Now, there's another move you can make, a little cruder, that goes to rent-a-mom. So here the focus is not on the caring service, and it's on the rental of a mother-like person. And yet the language would say that that it's the service itself that has commitment to the family. They're not saying here's mom and she's committed to the family, but their language says it's the service, but their title says you can rent her. And, oh, whoops. Yeah. You can also rent a dad. He looks a little clueless, but he is Fred. And then you can also, there's a language. This is kind of an unintended consequence. You have a kind of an ideology of the market as the marvel of the age, and you can buy what you want, everything for sale. And there's kind of a drift, a linguistic drift we're looking at here. Rent a grandma. And actually this is to spend time, but also teach people how to family recipes and cooking and on. You can also rent a friend. This was in the New York Times only half a year ago, and the text of this is, when you can order a pizza or the latest film, then why not rent a friend? Rent a Friend is an online service that allows users in the US and Canada and the UK to hire a friend for company. Users have to pay $25 a month to access a database of friends with pictures and profiles. Prices start from $10 an hour, strictly platonic. So interesting. And it's for people who travel to a new city. You know, someone can show you around, or you may want a workout partner for the gym. It's a lot cheaper than a personal trainer. Or you don't want to go to the movies alone. You can rent a friend. I actually saw an ad on the internet for a personal assistant for $400 a week, itemizing and pricing each task. So becoming a hostess to parties in my home, $40 an hour. Coming to social events with me, $40 an hour. Traveling, $300 a day plus travel. So traveling together. Taking care of utilities, $30 an hour. Sensual massage, $140 an hour. You must be between 22 and 32, be in good shape, good looking, articulate, sensuous, and able to keep confidences. No professional escorts and no sex involved. Well, okay, we've got a niche here. This is really interesting. I showed this to my sociology class, and it was so interesting, their responses. They said, this guy wants to buy a wife, but he doesn't want to be a husband. And so he wants someone to keep confidences and who would do all these things, but not the Mossian gift exchange, not the bonding, not the solidarity. And many of them said, look, I've never seen this ad, but it doesn't surprise me. And then a number of students who were in debt, and the cost of a Berkeley education is going up, said, boy, that pay looks good. So as a culture, it didn't come as a surprise, and let's hold on to that. Now, this might come as a surprise, but this is kind of the end of our tour, but there is a consulting company that is business that starts in, it's modeled on a consulting service in companies. Someone will come in and evaluate the performance of a worker. So Xerox would hire this consulting company, and they'd interview the man's boss, his co-workers, his subordinates, and do an evaluation 360, and then come back to him with a performance evaluation and recommendations for change. That's at work. Now that group has gone home and evaluates the same workers as fathers, and that's family 360. And they interview the wife, the children, if possible the nanny, sisters in the area, and come back with growth summary charts, investment guides, development plans, and recommendations. They have a 1 to 7 point memory creation scale, and you want to try and, it's fascinating, the presumption of control over something like a family memory. that you can manage it. And all right, so this is what we have are the here kind of a whole array of services, and they come to us as a melange of some very basic services that we all need, don't have enough of. We live in a care deficit, so that's basic services, together with this kind of wraparound of more particular specialized services, and then some of them are designed to help a family represent itself to itself, like the photograph album and the wedding and the party. So it's kind of has a symbolic, representational function. Some of these services enact a role, come in and organize the party, for example, name the child, for example. And some enact community roles, love coaches, internet dating, for example. And others help individuals on their personal journeys, the life coach, the ontologist, for example. So what I'd like to do today is to look at this, you can call it a service mall, I call it a market frontier, because not that we haven't always had services, especially the rich, and Thorsten Veblen in Theory of the Leisure class tells us about an array of services that help the individual detach himself from the necessities of life. But what I think is happening post-70s is a new, not a leisure class, but an unleisured class, that the two-job family that does need services. And these are kind of a wraparound for it. But again, the production, not just of house cleaning and the like, and cooking is being taken out of the house, but the emotional production is being removed. So how do we think about this? Let's keep open minds here. How do we need it? We kind of are tempted, but some of it's ridiculous. How do we think about it in neoliberal times? So what I'd like to do is to say, first of all, this isn't a big bad market story, but it's not let's ignore it, everything's fine story. It's a complicated story. I'd like to review various perspectives we can bring to this story, to describe my own, and to offer a thesis, and then to illustrate it with 3 cases from my interview material. I want to get to those. So we can take a mainstream economic sociology perspective to this. I think of the work of Viviana Zalazar, The Purchase of Intimacy, her 2005 book, which I think is very interesting. She talks about the kind of interaction work that we do to kind of put money and personal symbols together. But I actually find in that work something that needs to be added. I don't hear in that work any talk of capitalism or a system that is operating at a macro level, and I don't hear any talk of costs. And she has a set of categories for thinkers, and one of them is the hostile world theorist. Those are the Marxists, and she kind of dismisses that. If you're a hostile world theorist, then you're kind of being simplistic about the whole thing, and kind of dismisses that. Well, I am a hostile world theorist, and but the hostility goes one level up. It's I'm focusing on the kind of realms of life that have gotten out of whack, and I do see a conflict at that level. So Another approach is, of course, the Marxist approach, and in Marx's own fervent writing, he talks about when the bourgeoisie gains the upper hand, all Philistine sentimentalism is drawn on the icy waters of egotistical calculation. What writing? But that's not what I'm finding either. But in the tradition of the Marxist tradition, I see two kinds of directions. One is a book that I'm leaning on heavily by Robert Kuttner, Everything for Sale, which looks at commodification in the workplace. And another is Eva Elou's Cold Intimacies in the Frankfurt School tradition. And she looks at commodification in intimate life, but more from a cultural point of view. And her argument is that under capitalism, actually intimacies are made cold. And I'm not finding that either. So we also have care theorists who are kind of at the center of this, whose project is to expand the short supply of public care for the maintenance of American families. And it deals to some extent with the practical implications of neoliberal policies. And I'm thinking of Mignon Duffy's Making Care Count, just came out. And of course, Joan Tronto's work and that of many others. But on the whole, I'm not looking at the juncture of a market ideology and care and how we're to think about that. Finally, there's emotions theorists. I would count myself there, but also the psychoanalytic theorists. And Erik Erikson and Neil Smeltzer have looked at mechanisms of defense, not simply against our own internal anxieties that are internally generated, but mechanisms of defense as against social phenomena. Well, but what we don't have an understanding of are mechanisms of defense that can operate against capitalism itself, its ideological expressions, and can be a form of regulating capitalism from inside. In other words, we can have people who adapt and who live very personal lives and see no issue at all with any of this because they are using one or another kind of mechanism of defense very brilliantly, very usefully, but I will argue that our very skill at adapting to a kind of language and a kind of an intrusion becomes a way of blinding us to the big question of what kind of balance between market and non-market life we want to see. So I'm going to start my story not with the worm's eye view, which is what my material is about, but backing up a little to a crow's eye view of the context in which we are on this service market frontier. I'll start in the 1970s with Bob Kuttner's account of what has started to happen to our workplace. And his idea, and I think other commentators agree, in the 1970s there was a power shift that companies, big companies, got more power than labor unions, than government, than other nonprofits and civic society, either because they realized they could get cheaper labor abroad, or technological innovations, or just because they got smarter and better organized. There was a shift that took place. And in his account, then a prevailing ideology we're all familiar with it, neoliberalism, privatization, deregulation, cut government services, began to, and the idea of the celebration of the market began to take hold. But he began to notice that workplaces that used to have what Okun has called the invisible handshake in the late 60s between owners and workers, that was broken. And that workers began to lose security, and they increasingly came to move from the organization man, William White's picture of the long-term secure job, to a kind of a model in which job hopping wasn't just something for young people, the churning of people in their 20s, but a kind of a moving around from job to job. And there wasn't the deal, look, you get to be here a long time, and you give yourself your work to the workplace and give you security back. That the model turned more and more to that of piecework and the temporary worker. And he points out that the largest employer in the U.S. today is Manpower Temporary Services, Milwaukee-based company with 4,000 offices. So he then goes on to say that actually companies themselves, the community got withdrawn from companies themselves. They got to be taken apart, restructured, downsized like Tinker Toys. So there's a commodification of the worker and kind of a commodification of the companies that were doing that commodification. And then, now I'm picking up this story, there's kind of a ripple effect, an unintended consequence, I would say. Now I know this is large and it's speculative and it's the context for what I'm getting at, but that there, even nonprofits began to imitate profits or organizations. I was talking to a guy who started something called the Experience Corps. It's getting older people off the golf course into 7th grade math classes. It's a terrific organization. He said, I always have to apply for funding for this. It's a nonprofit. And he said, it used to be that I would say, look, I've got 7 Silicon Valley executives that are in East Oakland in 7th grade teaching math, and they used to say, miracle, fabulous, do it again. Now they'll say, well, that's very good, but what we need is more. And we need you to quantify exactly what each one is doing. And the whole ethos was more a total quality. You could see the imprint and the increased production imprint. It was a different kind of conceptual take on the very same golden work. Well, he thought, you know, what's happened is that they're now treating it like a business, but it's not a business, it's a nonprofit. So I think there's kind of a ripple effect, and that charities, museums, libraries, and of course many of these are now being privatized, libraries, for example, public universities, and sports teams that used to be associated with particular cities, are those sports figures are moving about as they are bought and sold. There have been trends in the naming of sports stadiums so that more of them are named after companies. So you're kind of seeing, even in the nonprofit world, the non-market world, although sports is, of course, market, a kind of a reflection of this. So, okay, we're seeing kind of community kind of being shooed out of the marketplace. And this is a trend that started actually job insecurity in lower ranks and moved up to the upper, middle and upper classes. And so here you have workers looking for some kind of communal support and for their families. And there what happens is that the market, that families and the communities to which they're turning, the market is moving in. And that's a trend that's starting at the upper levels of social class and kind of moving down. So it's like a catch-22 that you're not getting your community at work, despite what I say in the timeline. I think this is actually a more elite thing now. And so you go home for your sense of community, but there the market is moving in. So I like to sort of put these two weird trends, each with a different social class vector, kind of together as the overarching way of looking at the context in which emotional production is being taken out of the family. So what do we have here? A kind of a middle-class serviced family, curiously deprivatized. But let me take you to 3 examples. The first is of a woman I interviewed who was 50, single mother, looking for a lifetime partner. And she says this, I'm quoting from her. I remember waking up the morning after going out to a New Year's Eve party. I felt disappointed. I hadn't met any interesting men. I flipped on the television and watched a Wall Street Journal show on internet dating. I'd always thought internet dating would be tacky. It would leave me feeling icky and overexposed and naked. But then Evan Katz, a love coach, came on. Come on, guys, there's nothing embarrassing about internet dating. I jotted down his name, checked his website, ordered his book, and wondered if that shouldn't be my New Year's resolution, take control of my life. So it's a hard decision for her. And when she told her friends she was hiring a love coach, they said, you're doing what? You know, they said, no, we'll set you up, you know, why don't you go to, you know, a club, join a club, come with you if that's hard, you know, church socials, the community. And she said, you know, I'm 50, I've tried it, it didn't work, the community isn't helping me, and time is running out, and I'm gonna try it. So then she goes to Evan Katz, whom I went down to Los Angeles and interviewed. So what happens here is that she begins to learn a new language. She said, first, he's saying, looking for love is like work. You know, don't think of it. I know it sounds unromantic, but you have to work at it. You have to put in the hours. Actually, some people talked about putting in FaceTime. And you have to work at it a certain number of hours. And then you're going to be dealing with the world's biggest mall. He kind of said, you can't go back to the community. There's no going home. This is the way to date. But in order to do that, you have to brand yourself. So he helps her pick out a photograph, not this one, not that one, this one, and her subject line and her description of herself. And so he edits that. And Cyrano is his, Cyrano is what he calls it. And so she puts it up, and then he says, but before you go online, you have to know that there's a 1 to 10 scale that people are on, and there are a lot of, you are, because you're 50, you know, that puts you back, you're like a 4 or 5 on the 1 to 10 scale, and there'll be a lot of 2 men that are looking for 10 women, and so he does that. And then he says that you have to get a good ROI, return on investment of time and money. So he arms her, and I ask her, how is it at each increment? How do you, does this feel estranging? said, well, no, I was determined, and so it was work. I was counting my ROI. I was branding myself. I got online. And then all kinds of people met her. He said, I will go through all the replies and help you choose which one. And she said, no, 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 that's too personal. So that's where she drew her line. Okay, she wanted to select that only she could do that. Others said, no, you do it and let me know what you find. But, and then she met this very nice guy who had nothing in common with the list of attributes that she was looking for. You know, she was looking for someone about her age who lived in the area, who was kind-hearted. Well, he was kind-hearted, but, you know, she was an engineer. She wanted a fellow engineer and so on. And about her height and so on. Well, he was bald, and he was tattooed, and he was a musician, which she didn't have in mind, and he was wonderful. So what happened really, so I promised you a complex story. She bracketed the market language with which she was trained to go into this process. But what happened to her is that before she met Mr. Wright, she met two other fellows, and they didn't get along with her daughter. So both of them left. But when they left, she said they each said the same thing, which was, you were so easy to find that when that I'm just going to go back on Match.com and find someone just like you. So she felt at that point that they had marketized their perspective, that they really thought they were in the market. And she said, I felt, let's see if I got the, like a box of cereal. If he went right out to get a copy of me, was it me he ever really knew? I felt sad and depressed and then disgusted. It made me re-see our whole relationship as more shallow than I'd realized. And after he came back and that box of cereal wasn't on the shelf after all, I didn't want anything to do with him. So, okay, so she's both adapting to not only the idea of hiring a love coach, but the language and perspective that's required. And I asked her, does it ever seem surreal that you're actually in conversations? He told her how to have conversations, what not to talk about. And I said, well, what if the guy you're dating also has a love coach, and that love coach is telling them what to talk about? I mean, does it ever feel strange? And she said, yes, it does. But she carried on. And so, but what she did was see in these other ex-suitors an over-marketization, and at that point drew a line. So people are drawing a line. They're adapting. That is the big story here. I'm not seeing a huge, big conflict, nor am I seeing, which Eloise would say, nor am I seeing a kind of a cooling of relationships. What I'm seeing is kind of a mechanism of defense, of sort of drawing a line and saying, no, I won't go there, but I'll go so far. And a kind of repersonalization. It's like a desymbolization of the self and then a resymbolization of the self. Second example, a man and a birthday party planner. This is a man who is the one I just told you about, 60 hours a week, and he travels a third of the time, and his 5-year-old daughter is coming up for a birthday. Everyone in the neighborhood hires these party planners. It's upper middle class neighborhood. And he says, enough's enough. This is needs creation. He kind of had a market take on it. He said, you know, they're just making up a need for this stuff, and I won't have it. I want to be involved. I want to be an active dad, and to symbolize his role in his daughter's life, he wanted to plan the party. So he said to his wife, should we plan the party ourselves? And the wife says, we? And he's, okay, I'll do it. So he blows up the balloons, he sends out the invitations, he thinks of pin the tail on the donkey games, and he thinks, well, there should be some performance, and I think I could do that. So he gets up an outfit to be Crocodile Dundee. And so he has big boots, and he sports an Australian accent and big hat. And the children come, they sit down, so you had 9 or 10 little 5-year-olds sitting on the floor, and at this point in the party, he began to stalk forward and back as Crocodile Dundee, and he talked about crocodiles, and then he talked about kangaroos, and then he talked about koala bears, and then he began to think, what else do I have to say? He ran out of things to say, and the children lost interest, and the little daughter kind of said, you're not as good as Smokey Joe, and it was a collapse. And he was deeply humiliated. The parents were kind of watching this thing, and then they had to get in gear. And because these things are so planned, when there was no plan, the children fell into chaos because they were used to this. So so it was worse than it would have been. And then a neighbor came up to him in the kitchen and said, Michael, good try, but the planners, birthday planners, know what 5-year-olds think is funny. Leave it to them. They know how to do it. And he backed off. And he said, you know what, it's a specialty, you have to, special knowledge involved. I didn't have that special knowledge. So he had to vacate the role that he had symbolized to himself, imagined father. But when I interviewed the little daughter, this was a few years later, and asked her about that party, she said, well, first I was embarrassed, and then everyone in the family thought it was funny. And now I think, well, what a great dad that he tried that hard. So he recovered himself through this. That's an example of a contested kind of commercial home boundary in which he had drawn his boundary and got pushed back. I'm a little behind myself here. All right, those are two examples from the client point of view. One is confronted a commercial language and even cast of characters. That's the love seeker, in which she becomes kind of a salesperson. There's buy and sell cast of characters, and she has to deal with that face of commercialism. And then we have someone where a role is being, an act within a role is being subtracted, and we have Michael's confronting that. Now, just to give you a sense of the full scope of this this question, I'd like to take it now from the service provider's point of view. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about this in tomorrow's lecture. But I want to mention it here as well because it raises the issue of what commercialism does from the point of view of the provider, and this is at its extreme end. It's a much longer story here, but one of the kinds of forms of outsourcing of intimate life can deal with infertility. And there are many American and Canadian and European clients who go to states within the United States where it is legal and regulated to seek infertility treatment and to hire a commercial surrogate. But at a tenth of the cost, you can go abroad. And I went to an infertility clinic in a small town called Anand in Gujarat, India, which is the largest surrogacy, collection of surrogates in the world. And they live in a series of 3 dormitories. And I've interviewed a client in the United States and a set of surrogates in this clinic. And this is seemed to me really kind of the ultimate of outsourcing. Let me preface it by saying that I think surrogacy can be a very beautiful thing. I actually think it would be very beautiful, ultimate gift. But our question here is, under what cultural understanding is surrounding this gift? And in my conversation with Dr. Patel, who runs this fertility clinic, makes a lot of money doing it, she explained to me, well, this is win-win. This is the market at its best. This is the infertile couple gets a baby, and these very poor surrogates get money, which they badly need, and they are very poor. So what could be the problem? And she's right about the win-win, that I didn't disagree with that, but what was the setup there? Well, these are the surrogates, and the reasons that they have masks is that they don't want to be seen by their families. All their husbands know what they're doing, and some of them push their wives to do this. But other kin in Gujarat generally don't understand what surrogacy is, confuse it with adultery, and there would be tremendous shaming. So they are disguising their identity. But what happens is that a couple will come to this clinic, and the egg from the woman, the sperm from the man, will be joined in a petri dish, become an embryo, which is implanted in the surrogate. The couple, Dr. Patel doesn't want relations between the surrogate and the intending couple. She wants it very cut and dry. She wants an efficient operation. She wants more surrogates. It's Henry Ford. That's what it is. She wants more surrogates. She wants quality control, so they are kept in a dormitory for 9 months, not allowed to go home. They're not allowed to have sex with their husbands. They might get infected. So, and if they leave the clinic, they have to do it with an escort. And then they give up the baby easily. Is the idea, if they don't attach to the baby and don't attach to the client. So the surrogates are asked to think about their womb as a carrying case, as a bag or as a suitcase, and to think about the baby from the start as something they will have to give up. And again, discourages personal relations. Well, I asked these surrogates, how do you do this? How is this for you? And they would say things like, well, whenever I think about the baby, I think about my own children, Or one woman would say, if you put a jewel in my hand, I don't covet it. Others said, just try not to think about it. So you could see that their detachment from these babies was not a natural detachment. They were working, doing what I would call emotional labor. Not the kinds of emotional labor nannies do to attach to a child, but the kind of emotional labor required to distance themselves from it. So this was a whole kind of outsourcing that I hadn't seen before. Actually, there's a story of that I have not from my, the children generally are whiter than the surrogates, too, because it's more upper class people that call for this service, or lower caste women that service as surrogates. But I talked to one surrogate, and she was on her second pregnancy, and she was very proud that she had gotten a new house and had been able to pay for the education of her two children, private school. I saw them come in with new uniforms. There's that whole side of it, which is huge. But she said to me something that really I found haunting. She said, well, I did it out of free choice. And I thought, well, that's another kind of rhetorical, kind of cultural trope that's in the air, that we're supposed to claim to do things out of free choice. And she did, but with what I would call imprisoned options. And that side of the formulation was being lost. So she was dealing with what I would call a kind of a self-commodification, and her task was to kind of de-commodify herself, to rehumanize herself. Many different kinds of ways that worked out, but just tell you one more surrogate story, which was of a woman who, this was not my own interview, but one done by SAMA, which is a feminist medical organization in Delhi. And she said that there was one client from Canada who were Sikh, and the clients asked the surrogate to sign in the contract, which is in English, which they don't speak or read, that the baby, that the surrogate would go to a Sikh temple in order for the fetus to hear the reading of the sacred scriptures of the Sikh holy book for 9 months. And this was and the Hindu woman, yes, signed and said fine. So what she was is this Hindu woman carrying a Sikh baby. And I don't know, you have Marx's alienated man, not in the 19th century factory, and not a man, and he's not making a car, it's not a production in the old-time way, but what you have is a service industry, you have a woman, but the issue of estrangement and commodification is very definitely there. What this woman said at the end was, but secretly I pray Hindu prayers for baby. I love that. Great. So, okay, what I've tried to do is to kind of give you the contours of what I'm thinking of as a market frontier, and you can see why I think of it as a frontier. While we're subtracting certain commodified services, we're certainly adding them to the front end, this is being one. And in India, it's not only commercial surrogacy is legal, it's unregulated. Okay, so what are we to make of this? I think there's a good news story, a bad news story, and a something to think about story. In the end, I feel like what I'm doing is just a meditation on kind of where I think there's a drift that we're not looking at and we're not problematizing it because we need parts of it. And we're ambivalent about it. So it's a meditation is what I'm offering here. The good news is that the market does meet real needs, and good news is there are many service jobs for women, and the bad news is that from a feminist perspective, it would seem to be an end run around a kind of a new manhood in the family, and a reformulated, restructured, family-friendly workplace, and that and so it's a good news, bad news story. But I think what we've got here, if we look at the American family now, the rise of the middle-class serviced family is, number one, curiously deprivatized. There are lots of people in it. It's no longer that private, coming and going, and sometimes secretly, because people are ashamed to consult some of these services. I talked to an elder care manager who said, and that's someone you go to help you figure out how to get your elderly mom into a nursing home, and not the person who feeds her and combs her hair. It's a managerial level. And she said, the first job I have to do is tell people not to be so guilty. Oh, I should be doing this myself. No, I'll come in, it's fine. So people are sometimes guilty about this. So it's a deprivatized family, although not obvious, not in some clear way. But each of these encounters between intimate life and commercial life, I think, raises three big issues. One is the outsourcing of highly symbolized family or community roles, and that means the authority that goes with those roles. You know, do you get to say, hey, I know what 5-year-olds think is funny, or I'm going to find out, it's up to me to find out what 5-year-olds are funny? Or you're going to say, no, really, the expert on 5-year-old humor is the party planner. Authority, and even qualities that go with those roles. So that's what can go out by qualities. I mean this, I interviewed a woman who was a personal assistant, and she said, I work for these speedy people that snap their fingers, get it done yesterday, quick, 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 quick. And they want things done, and I have to be on the phone patiently. I have to make sure that the person hears me well and isn't offended and accepts the order. And at the end of it, she said, he outsources patience to me. So there's an outsourcing not just of acts, but of authority and qualities, emotional qualities as well. So that's what goes out. And that's the first issue people are encountering. The second is what comes in. You think of outsourcing as what you're getting rid of, but actually a whole language and perspective can come in, as we saw with the love coach and his counting ROI. That wasn't a way she was thinking before she hired this guy. So that's the second. In his memory, something on a 1 to 7 scale. So that's, when you outsource, you are also bringing in a kind of, sometimes a commercial worldview into the home. And that's the second kind of issue that arises. And the third is the issue of the commodification of the worker herself. And I gave you that most extreme example of the surrogate. But all of these three cases and many others, there was a kind of a transition to focusing on the result, the thing you can buy. So the perfect soulmate, the perfect wedding, the perfect party, the baby. And into the cultural shadow went the journey to get to that result. So there was a less focus on the journey and more on the destination. Less on the means and more on the result. And in a way, a kind of a bottom lining of personal life, which I think is an often unconscious kind of effect of upbringing, of this encounter of market and personal life. So what we do, this is the last part of my argument, when we encounter these three challenges and the bottom lining, I think is to find actually ways of repersonalizing life. And in many cases, people would say, okay, I'm going to hire someone to walk the dog and someone to take care of the kids and my elderly mother, but I'm going to make, Christmas is going to be a great big deal. Or there's one family that took care of a horse. They outsourced many things in their personal lives, but they did everything for this horse, including feed it and groom it and pick up after it, and that became kind of this, the new symbol of the family together, producing something together. And others, I would say, defended themselves, developed a way of recovering the personalness of personal life by making friends with and the person that they hired. So that kind of empathic reach, I think of as another kind of way of repersonalizing life. So the final thing is that if we adapt by using these mechanisms of defense, as kind of the commodity frontier continues its journey, unrestrained ideologically or structurally, and we're so good at adapting. I mean, look at this, we're buying water, 20 years ago, to buy water would seem silly. We buy climbing the mountain, I was on Market Street and watching these people on treadmills, and with their water bottles, and thought, wait a minute, they bought walking and water. And it seemed perfectly normal. I've been on a treadmill, and it was my... So I think we're amazing adapters to this thing. But is adaptation our friend or our enemy? And is it getting in the way of standing back and looking at the whole picture and seeing that we may be in a Habermasian kind of colonialism of market life, and that there is a conflict involved at a macro level, and that if what we can envision, I think, is a world in which the market is in a balanced, rebalanced relationship to government and civic and community life. And that's what we're not, I think, looking at. So that's my meditation.
Do you want to just follow up and give us something?
Yeah, so how does this seem? Does this seem strange? Or part of this familiar? I give this talk in Italy and people laugh. In England, they get very nervous. Yes?
You and I and some others in the room, because of our age and experience, are aware of the losses. And even the 52-year-old woman has been around before this trend began. And I'm wondering, what is the experience of people in their 20s when you talk about these things, either as participants or your students? Do they even see the dark side that you and I see?
Great question. My students were very polite and respectful of these commercial services. It was almost a new form of diversity. Oh, you know, good, you know. One of my students did an ingenious thing. He got up a big sign, rent a friend, and went around Berkeley campus saying, well, I'm a graduate student at Haas Business School, and I'm just trying to see if this would be a viable business. Could you tell me, would this be something that you would use, and or would you, be employed for it? And people, he did a video of their responses. Oh, well, good for you. And yeah, well, no, thank you. I have my friends. Sounds like that, I think. It's an interesting question. Yes?
With some of your examples, especially that family 360 thing, I was struck by the parallel between what you're talking and the sort of ongoing medicalization of large spheres of life. Like, take, for example, the 20th century, first, deviant thought was medicalized, then by the end, your basic emotional state was medicalized. And in the process of doing so, you also introduce commodity transactions, right? And you go to a psychiatrist, you pay them, and so on. And so it seems to me that that a lot of this, on one hand, has been going on in sort of related areas, and on the other, there's this question of what is the sort of the underlying legitimation for this process. Right here, there was this idea, okay, there is this thing called psychoanalysis. These people are experts on how you should feel. Now there are people who are experts on how you can make your kid laugh, so you shouldn't cry yourself anymore. So I'm going to expand on what you see as a sort of legitimating process.
The legitimating process, yeah. I think it's cultural, actually. Psychiatry, there's a whole social movement that pressed it forward. I must say, I'm a great advocate of psychiatry, having done it myself. And, I think a lot, we have to look at the cultural bubbles behind, I think, these economic trends. And I like your use of the word legitimizing. And there's, in a way, each of these stories that I gave you were a little legitimation crisis, a little, conflict about it. And people are for, people against, people ambivalent, and we're struggling with it. And maybe we just have to take it one service at a time. I mean, some of them are medicalized, and so they're borrowing the legitimacy of the doctor, and that's a very powerful source of legitimacy. The wantologist is a little bit in trouble. The claims the science, but people say, oh man, no, going too far, good try. But I guess I am led to reflect on our extraordinary capacity to absorb innovation. And it puts a premium on a capacity to sort. Oh, this is crazy, this I need. I heard many people talk about life coaches this way. One person said what a number of others felt. Life coach, oh, that's ridiculous. What's the telephone number? So we're kind of, I think it's useful to kind of catch these things as before we're drinking, bought water and breathing bought air, to kind of think about whether that's what we want and whether there isn't a missing, unbought world with its own ideas and, vital communities with their own folkways. I guess I feel like when the market's the only game in town, we're making free choices within that game, but we're not considering other social worlds, other games. Yeah, gay.
So I think this is, it's really provocative and interesting. So I want to play devil's advocate for a second. I guess I'm really uncomfortable with the exact parallel between the ontologist and the surrogate, even though I have no clue what a ontologist is. But it seems like some of the purchases that you're talking about, people are purchasing some form of expertise that they feel that they're lacking, like the birthday planner. And that's really different than purchasing water. And somehow, I guess, I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to think about those a little bit differently, that sometimes people buy expertise because they feel like they can't reproduce something that they think that their grandmother's, it just seems like somehow that expertise is more valuable to people. Whereas the surrogate story, it looks like these human beings are treated like test tubes, and it's horrifying. I don't want to say the ontologist, but the life coach or the person who teaches them how to make those ads or the birthday planner are providing some kind of access to a set of knowledge that they don't feel like they either have themselves or have the time to develop in time to get that 5-year-old birthday party together. And it just feels like they're different.
Oh, well, I know what you mean. I know exactly what
And
you
will you
mean.
please tell us what a
I guess
ontologist
I'm
is?
contesting that very classification. Clearly, I started this project with these very different categories in my brain. Very different. But as I'm listening to people, and it made me anxious, and I don't like it. And I still have different categories, even having done this work. People move from one category to the other in kind of a scary way. And I guess I'm holding up to suspicion our capacity to adapt. I guess I just, that's the punchline. We're really adapting to this thing. We're not drawing distinctions. And so with the surrogacy thing, I think, is a crime. And I worry there that William Grader in One World Ready or Not talks about the race to the bottom, and I worry that actually bad as things are in the U.S. it's gone to India, but Cambodia can say we'll do it cheaper. So and rights will be vitiated along the way. So that feels to me a highly serious thing. The ontologist looks trivial and they go out of business and so on. But in kind, I guess I want to say there's a similar response to this, and I wish for more cultural clarification on this. Yeah.
I think it's provocative too, and but I'm wondering. What I hear is a story that you've been talking about for a long time, which is sort of the emptying out of the household and the replacement of what was once women's work in the home by services and commodities and so forth. But I think there's another story going on implicitly, which is the also rising expectation of what family life is supposed to be. If I'm infertile, I should be able to have a baby with my own genetic material. If I should be, my child, my 5-year-old should have the same kind of birthday party that all the other 5-year-olds had. I should have a perfectly matched mate. And so there's also this idealization of family life that's going on simultaneous with its emptying out. And it's becoming increasingly unrealistic. And I'm wondering how you interpret that trend.
Well, I think that's very good. I think it's a push by the market, too. I mean, who is it that's lifting these standards but the market itself? You need the market in order to achieve the standard. And yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And there is kind of a weak counter movement, you know, I think, in culture to say, actually, we don't need what these services are saying we need. We can contest these elevated standards and expectations. There's one woman who said all the third graders in California have to come in with a Spanish mission model that has, you know, 4 sides, and it has a front and a back, and it has fake trees, and you bring it in. Well, you can go to Michael's supply store, and over on the left there is a Spanish mission, the San Jose mission, there's the Dolores mission. You can just take it off its ring and the cash register, and your kid has this perfect thing. Well, and if your kid is the one that put it together out of scraps from around home, they're embarrassed. So it's an elevated standard. You know, the commercial version wins. But there's a parent sort of backlash to that, saying, no, this is going too far. It's better to have less good Spanish mission. So in this particular school, there was a backlash. But your point is very well taken. Yes?
Are there any insights from the if we can push the storyline back a little bit further, from the 1930s and the aftermath of the Great Depression, about alternatives to this worldview that it seemed like that period, if I'm interpreting correctly, there was a pushback to some of the trends. So I'm wondering if you see this as inexorable, or if there are potential historical insights from that period.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but certainly in the 20th century, it took hard times to develop a kind of public community response. In a way, I guess this story is we're getting funneled into the market because of the absence of community and the absence of government public provision. So we're funneled and we're pushed and we're adapting. But the counter movements, I think in the 30s, the whole Townsend movements, for example, millions of people were getting together. It was like the early friendly societies in England. And there is a modern day revival of that. Common security clubs, which have been developed through an IPS guy named Chuck Collins and Institute for Policy Studies. And I think there are now something like over 100 common security clubs, which are, and this in an era of unemployment and home loss, that get together and provision each other communally. And it's really taking off. And people share things, they share skills, and they go around and winterize houses. You know, you get 10 people with one expert, you can winterize a house and cut the heating bill in half, and you go from house to house to house. It's based in New England, but actually all over the country. So there are kind of community, you know, alternatives, and they're there. Yeah.
Is there good evidence about how far down the class structure this goes? Because often the public representation of these things make it seem like this is a bigger trend than it actually is. And I don't know anybody who's had a birthday planner. I'm sure it happens in Madison, but I don't think it's the norm. It's not the standard that people have birthday planners.
I bet you a lot more people have life coaches than you know.
We know that one of the consequences of the increased inequality is the amount of discretionary income in the top 20% or so, and especially the top 5, has gone up, especially with 2 earners. So there is a stratum at the top that has a huge amount of discretionary income they can throw around. So they can buy all these services. But the notion of the middle class being rather hollowed out and insecure and not having a lot of discretionary income, I just wonder what percentage of the population is actually buying all these services on the market.
Right. It's if you look at eating out, for example, which is one form of outsourcing something, usually symbolically loaded. The poor do it just about as much as the rich. They don't go to 5-star restaurants, but they go to McDonald's, but they do eat out almost as much as the rich do. And I guess I would argue too that they're exposed to this stuff, even if they're not hiring a life coach. It's on television, it's on Oprah. Surrogacy is on Oprah. She's all for it. She's going to India and so on. And I actually did a survey. I know I'm here in Wisconsin, land of Commodification work. Through the Survey Research Center, I asked 1,000 Californians, if you had all the money you wanted, would you hire a life coach, someone a birthday party, sort your out? And it's really interesting what the findings were. There wasn't a giant leap for this. It was about a third that said they would be interested. But it wasn't the upper middle class that said they would. It was the least educated and the lowest income and the most socially isolated. Those were, I had an item that said, do you agree or disagree that sometimes, how to go, when you really need to depend on something, it's better to depend on money than on your friends or family. And it's those that answered that who generally were low income and low education that said, yes, I'd like someone to do the emotional things at home. So the poor may not be hiring all these people and when they start it, but the more you do empty out in a way family, the more desire. Yes.
I was wondering how you see the difference between older forms of this, like sex workers are dowries and selling children, and also I don't know if you want to think of religious workers as a kind of like older form of life coach or one-cologist or something. And
Yes.
they're not, it's kind of on a pay-as-you-want marketing, but. Do you think is an essential difference between these earlier forms, or just like an expansion of that?
Just an expansion, I think. And there are some things that where marketization is increasing, and some where they're decreasing. There used to be, not so much in the U.S., but certainly in Europe, wet nurses, for example, which now has gone out of style because of a cultural belief in importance of breastfeeding. And I think that certainly services done by people who are paid is not new, but I see this as an extension of that. I see it, what's different is that the clientele is different. I think that's come down as a class. And that it was mainly rich people who hired a lot of servants. And, so I think it's trickle down, that's different. And the more kind of specialized the niches, I think that is different too.
One more question, Nama, you have your hand up, then I think we should close off.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick. Thank you so much. I especially liked your conceptualization of the frontier. And I guess my question would piggyback on two earlier comments. First, with regards to the hostility assumption, I think that there is a lot that goes on as far as changing subjectivities, and I'm not sure, I guess you're assuming that there is a defense mechanism which might be shifting, maybe shifting across a generational line, maybe shifting depending on personal contingents, the family that you grew up on. But I can definitely attest that, in my generation, I see that a lot more people take for granted certain services such as, online dating and life coaches. And yes, they would still draw borders and boundaries at different points. I totally agree with that. But I'm not sure that the initial inclination would be a defense mechanism or necessarily perceived as such. My second question was also because I had a similar gut feeling to that Gabe had, Professor Simon, with regards to the differences between what the services that you're describing exactly replaces old forms of gift exchanges and community services. So commodification services might be, there might be different lines there between something that had never existed before and is now commodified and something that replaces old forms of gift exchanges. And even here, each and every example, of course, deserves, and I'm sure you treated it much more extension. So there used to be matchmakers, right?
Right.
So that's something that existed a long time ago. So I'd love to.
Right, but matchmakers that knew the community and, we're often paid. Yeah. So, let's see if you were saying that, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying, that something feels different between, there's some distinctions that are in your mind that weren't clear here. What were they again?
I guess which of the services, can all these services that are part of this new frontier of the market be categorized under just the same category, or can we describe some of them as outsourcing and others as something else, as far as expertise or as far as I'm getting help but I'm still part of doing this versus someone else completely doing that?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, some are replacing something that was there before, some are not replacing anything, they're totally new, and some are helping you do your own thing better. Yeah.
And that I would assume it affects how much you can repersonalize something that has been depersonalized.
Right. Yeah, maybe defense is too strong a word, but there is an act of re-symbolization is perhaps what I'm looking